I'm talking to a live audience, sometimes I'll say, is anyone here 5'2" or under? Please clap. So if there's something you need that's on a shelf that's 8 feet off the floor, so you're going to have to get a tool, like a step stool or a ladder. So that's what we do, people with disabilities, all day long. all day, every day. But just because I have an impairment doesn't mean I'm always in a disabling situation. We got digital, social, and built environments that were created by people without impairments, for people without impairments.
Welcome back to the Rolling Tip by Sensable. Today's guest is Dr. Kirk Adams, a blind leader, advocate, and systems thinker who has spent decades advancing economic opportunities for people with disabilities, including blind and low vision individuals. A former CEO of American Foundation for the Blind, a seasoned nonprofit executive, and now the founder of Innovative Impact, a firm that focuses on solving large scale challenges in disability inclusion in the biggest industries in our world. Um, he not only brings a personal experience as a blind individual himself and going through numerous ups and downs in his career, but also an industry wide professional insight to any conversation. In this conversation, we dig deep into what real and sustainable changes for the blind community can actually look like for the entire world as a whole. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Hello, Dr. Kirk. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to be having this conversation with you, although we've been working for a while together, but it's good to just sit down and have a chat. Please tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, Sakshi. I really appreciate it. So I am Dr. Kirk Adams. I have a PhD in leadership and change. That's where the doctor comes from. And I am a blind person. I'm talking to you from my home office in Seattle, Washington. I became blind when my retinas both detached, bilateral retinal detachment, when I was in kindergarten. And I had gotten on the school bus to go home, and it had snowed a little bit. And when I got off the bus at the end of our block, this is just north of Seattle, I couldn't distinguish any details. The snow, everything looked the same. I couldn't find my way home. One of our neighbors found me crying in her backyard and recognized me from the neighborhood and took me to my mom, who immediately knew something was pretty wrong with me, and rushed me to our pediatrician, who rushed me to Cabrini Hospital to a retinal specialist. And I had a emergency retinal surgery that night that was not successful. This was before laser surgery. People's retinas detach these days. A lot can be done with lasers. But I became totally blind very quickly, within a couple of days.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the at that time, my parents, who were young, they were in their mid-20s. They'd never met a blind person before I became one. They were told, Kirk can't come back to the public, the neighborhood school. He needs to go to the school for the blind kids.
Wow.
So most states had a state school for the blind. They visited the Washington school. They weren't very pleased with what they saw as far as the level of academic activity. Someone told them that Oregon school was excellent. They visited. I remember visiting there with them. I guess I must have been 6 years old, prior to first grade. And they thought it was great, and they quit their jobs and moved the family to Oregon so I could go to school there.
Wow.
And I went there first, second, and third grade, and I learned my blindness skills. I was totally blind, so there was no question if I needed to learn Braille. So I learned Braille, at the kind of the same pace that sighted kids were learning print, first, second, third grade.
Nice.
Learned how to travel independently and confidently with the long white cane. And today it would be called keyboarding, but then it was typing. I learned how to type on a typewriter, so I could start into public school when I was ready, which was fourth grade. And then I was the only blind student in my schools after third grade. Went through, got a college scholarship, a full academic scholarship. Had had lots of challenges, like many of us with significant disabilities do, in finding employment.
Hmm.
Wound up in the securities industry for 10 years, basically selling tax-free municipal bonds over the phone. It was a sales
Wow.
job, which I didn't love, but I made enough money to get married and have children and buy a house and did all those things. And then when I turned 30, I really got clear I didn't want to do that the rest of my life, and I went through a process of discovery and decided I really should be in the nonprofit sector, and
Mm.
I should be you know, working with nonprofits that create opportunities for people who are blind. So I entered the nonprofit sector through fundraising. My first
Hmm.
nonprofit job was a development officer, Seattle
Okay.
Public Library Foundation, raising money for the statewide Talking Book and Braille Library. From
Lovely.
there, I got hired by the Lighthouse for the Blind to start their foundation and their fundraising program, which I did. I was
Hmm.
given the opportunity to take on more and more responsibility and to go through a process to develop my knowledge, skills, and abilities to the point where I could apply to be
Hmm.
the next CEO upon the retirement of the person who was in place. I was successful in moving into that role. I was at the Lighthouse for the Blind in Seattle for a total of 16 years. And then
Wow.
I was recruited to apply for the job to lead the American Foundation for the Blind, which was Helen Keller's organization,
Hmm.
a very historic, iconic blindness organization. So
Yeah.
I was given that honor and privilege. And my wife and I moved from Seattle to New York City in 2016 and then to DC in 2017 during the pandemic, back home in 2020 to Seattle, where I led the organization remotely during the heart of the pandemic.
Hmm.
And then in 2022, I just got clear that I was ready for a different chapter, did not want to move back to the East Coast.
Mm.
My father had passed away. My mother is still here but needs some support. My son who lives a mile away from us, was starting a family, so grandchildren were coming. So we decided we needed to stay in Seattle. So I transitioned out of my role at AFB
Mm.
in the summer of 22 and set up a consulting practice. When AFB announced that I would be leaving, I was contacted by a number of organizations and people I'd done
I'm
cool
sure.
cool stuff with before to ask if I was available to help with this or that, and I
Yeah.
found myself saying, "Yes, that sounds fun. That sounds interesting." So I needed I needed to set up an LLC, which I did. So I have a consulting practice called Innovative Impact,
Hmm.
and coming up on 3 years, and I am doing what I wanted to do, which is work with people I like you, on fun,
Yeah.
innovative, high impact projects that are going to accelerate inclusion of people who are blind and have other disabilities in our world.
That is brilliant. I have so many questions almost for every other sentence you shared. So let's rewind a little. Let's go
Sure.
back to where you started from. So, when you were at school, a big part of school is socializing, right? Making
Uh-huh.
friends and all of that. So, as someone who started losing vision at a relatively young age, not maybe at 6, but more like
Mm-hmm.
18, 19, I
Mm-hmm.
struggled with that, socializing
Mm-hmm.
with sighted folks. What was that experience like for you, being surrounded by all these sighted
Yeah.
people, being
Yeah.
among their environment?
So I don't I don't want to minimize the psychosocial aspects of blindness.
Mhm.
It is stressful. It is exhausting sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, my parents gave me, along with the School for the Blind, gave me the gift of high expectations. They held very high expectations of me,
Yeah.
as they did with their other two children. So they didn't want to see anything less than an A on a report card. My dad was a high school basketball coach and teacher. My mom taught fourth grade, so
Wow.
always academics first. Um,
Amazing.
expected us to be involved in athletics and after school extracurricular activities.
Mhm.
So that part was there. And every fourth, fifth, sixth grade, probably into seventh and eighth grade were okay. We're good. I mean, I
Mhm.
had friends. I lived in small towns in
Yeah.
Oregon and Washington. I was always the only blind kid in the district.
Yeah.
But I was able to kind of participate at the levels that the other kids were in school and fun. And, I had a tandem bike and I had some friends that would ride in front and I'd ride in back. And we lived in a little town and we could cruise all around and go to the park and down to the creek and all that stuff. But then at about age 16, things really changed a lot because in those communities, when kids turn 16, they typically got some sort of job, some sort of part-time job,
Yeah.
working at the grocery store or on a farm or, babysitting or mowing lawns or something. And then
Mm.
everyone got a driver's license. So
Yeah.
everyone started driving. There was no public transportation at all. So
Wow.
I was
Okay.
very, very isolated from kind of age 15 to 18. We moved from Silverton, Oregon to Snohomish, Washington after my sophomore year in high school. And I became a little less isolated there in that it was a bigger school. There were more kids with more interests. It was also 45 minutes from Seattle, so you could go into Seattle to concerts and things like
Mm.
that. So I established kind of a friend group there, but still everyone drove. There was no public transportation. So I spent some pretty lonely evenings at home by myself. And
Yeah.
then things changed again when I went to college. I
Mm.
went to Whitman College in Walla Walla, which is a small liberal arts college, about 1,100 students.
Okay.
It's on a manageable sized campus where, with my orientation mobility skills, I was able to navigate very well. Hardly anyone had a car.
Yeah.
Walla Walla, Washington is not close to any big city, so people mostly hung out there. And I kind of got back to the point where I was on the par with everybody else. And
Amazing.
met a young lady the first week, and we'll be married 40 years here in September. So that
Oh
went well for me.
my God. Clearly.
Yeah, and I was a good student. I graduated Phi Beta Kappa and cum laude and all those
Wow.
things. And then everything took another turn because after graduation, I moved back home to my
Hmm.
parents and lived in the basement in
Oh.
Snohomish, Washington, again with no public transportation. Was disconnected from my social networks and started applying for jobs.
Mm.
And I would send out my cover letter and my resume. And I was looking for finance related jobs. My undergrad is in economics. So I was looking for kind of financial analyst, open starting positions, banking, accounting, and I would get a phone interview, and it would go great, and they'd invite me in for the in-person interview.
Yeah.
And then I'd walk in with my long white cane and my slate and stylus so I could take some notes in Braille.
Yeah.
And the employer had probably never worked with a blind person before or seen
Mm.
how a blind person does efficiently works. And so I wasn't getting hired. I was being told a lot. You were our second our runner-up candidate. Or you were
Ugh.
one of the top three candidates, but
So
we
annoying.
offered it to someone else. So
Yeah.
then I started putting in my cover letter. I started disclosing my disability because if you have an apparent disability like I do, because I use a
Mm.
cane and braille and such,
Mhm.
they're going to find out at some point. So
Yeah.
I wasn't disclosing until I got to the point where I went to the interview, and
Yeah.
they didn't know I had a disability until then. So then I changed my cover letter and I started disclosing, saying, I'm totally blind. This is how I've done what I've done. This is how I'll do the job. And then I
Yeah.
wasn't even getting a phone interview. So
Ugh.
again, then I was, felt frustrated, pretty angry. My classmates who perhaps even the slackers and the partiers and the people who didn't go to class, they were getting jobs.
Yeah.
And I was not. But my resume landed on the desk of a sales manager for a small securities firm,
Mm.
and he had also gone to Whitman. He'd also been an econ major, like 15 years before me. Some of the professors he had were still there, so he called some of them and said, could Kirk Adams sent a resume. Could he sell tax-free bonds over the telephone?
Yeah.
And they said, sure he could. So I was offered that job and I took it, and that allowed me to move out of my parents' house and get an apartment. And Roz moved in with me, and things were better. The job was sales, and it was
Mm.
cold calling, and 50 cold calls a day every day, which
Oh,
builds a
wow.
lot of strong character. No,
Yep.
straight
Okay.
commission, no salary, no benefits, no paid vacation. But I
Wow.
did that for 10 years, and like I said earlier, I made a fine living for a kid in his 20s, and was able to do some of the things that I wanted to do as far as starting a family and owning a home and things like that.
Honestly, it sounds pretty much like all the sighted friends that I have. Like I think after asking you that question, and as I hear
Hmm.
as I was hearing you answer it, I realized that all of us have those um, phase, phases, right, of
Yeah.
high social activity and then low social activity. Sure, our reasons might be different. Your reasons might be different from a lot of sighted kids, but I suppose at the end of the day, those phases just happen.
Hmm.
Um, okay, if you think about blindness as a part of your identity, can you think of any key things, in any key ways that blindness has specifically shaped your life and identity for you? Let's say if you took the blindness aspect out of it,
Hmm.
what would be different in terms of your self identity?
Hmm. Well, I can't take the blindness part out, but what
Yeah,
what
of
what
course.
prompted me is I want to talk about the distinction between an impairment and a disability.
Hmm.
So I have a visual impairment. I can't see. I can't apprehend the world visually.
Hmm.
So some people have visual impairments, hearing impairments, cognitive impairments, mobility impairments are the kind of the four main categories.
Hmm.
But just because I have an impairment doesn't mean I'm always in a disabling situation.
Right.
So if I have the tools and the training and the techniques I need to operate efficiently in whatever realm of living it is, then I'm not a disabled person at that moment. It's a very
Yeah.
fluid set of characteristics. So um, our dynamics. So, the little example I often use is I've run a lot of board meetings in my day, and if I have my agenda in Braille and my financial reports and my committee reports, I can run that meeting just as efficiently as anyone, as a sighted person
Yeah.
can. So although I have a visual impairment, I'm not in a disabling situation. If
Absolutely.
I walk in and you hand me a stack of print,
Hmm.
then my visual impairment does not allow me to interact efficiently with the environment, the built environment of that print material. So then I am in a disabling situation.
Right.
So I think that's a really important
Mhm.
consideration, and I guess the strategies are to um, lessen the instances of disabling situations by alternate techniques, technology, training, to fit better with the environment. So we got digital, social, and built environments that were created, not surprisingly, created by people without impairments primarily, for
Yeah.
people without impairments primarily.
Mhm.
So because they're not designed with people with impairments in mind, although that's becoming more common,
Yeah.
we find ourselves in these situations where our impairment does not permit a good fit with the environment. So that's when we're disabled.
Right.
So I guess my life has been around developing some unique strengths. I think we all do. People who live with disabilities develop really unique strengths, which is super
Yeah.
cool. If you read a book called The Talent Code, it talks about how do people develop strengths, and it's through overcoming increasingly difficult challenges.
Mm.
So if you're going to be a chess champion or a concert pianist or an Olympic athlete, you're going to go through those challenges in a very intentional, structured way. You're going to
Right.
learn the basics. Then you're going to start doing something that's a little harder and a little harder, and spend time overcoming increasingly difficult challenges to get you to your level of mastery.
Yeah.
And the situation of living with a disability, we're put in situations where we have increasingly difficult challenges just through living.
Yeah.
As you become a high school student, a college student, and try to go to work, try to be involved in romantic relationships, buy houses, go on vacations, raise kids. As your life becomes more and
Yeah.
more complex, these situations where you have these poor fits between you and your impairment and the environment become increasingly complex and challenging. But
Yeah.
as we learn to overcome those challenges, we develop strengths in like resilience, perseverance,
Yeah.
creative problem solving, the ability to analyze and manage risk, the ability to plan and organize, the
Yeah.
ability to put together teams and work in teams, um,
Yeah.
communication skills. And then
Mm-hmm.
if I'm talking to a live audience, sometimes I'll say, is anyone here, 5 feet tall or 5'2" or under? And there's always somebody, please clap. And I just say, so if you walk into a hotel room and there's something you need that's on a shelf that's 8 feet off the floor,
Mm-hmm.
your characteristic of your height does not allow you to have a good fit with that built environment of that high shelf. So you're going to have to get a tool, like a step
Yeah.
stool or a ladder,
Mm-hmm.
or you're going to have to form a team and find someone who's taller to partner with you to get
Yeah.
it down. And then you might ask for a lower shelf, or you might make sure you don't put yourself in a situation where there are things on high shelves. So
Yeah.
you might alter your environment. So that's what we do, people with disabilities, all day long, all
Yeah.
all day,
Just
every
moving the
day. We do
frequency.
that,
Yeah.
and it helps us develop some great capabilities.
Absolutely. I do think resilience is one of the things that are is quite common in our community. Just because of the environment we, exist in by default. Also, all the things you listed, they honestly, I've said that a few times in my interviews or something, that I feel like all these things that by default I developed being visually impaired made me a great entrepreneur, because that's exactly what a standalone founder or an entrepreneur requires, that
Hmm.
persistence, resilience, and the idea of building teams, how to solve a problem creatively, all of that basically is like such an important part of being a founder. And I feel like being visually impaired somehow helps me be a better founder. Okay, so if anybody knows you even a little, they already have some version of this answer in their own head. But in your own view, what are some things that you've done or aspire to do that actually challenge the traditional notions of what blind people can or should do?
Well, a couple things come to mind. I was very involved in athletics. I wrestled, which is kind of a default sport for blind boys in high school
Interesting.
and college. I also ran cross country, which is somewhat unusual as a totally blind person. And
Wow.
so I
I
had the girls cross country coach was a gentleman named Mac Bates, and he was a very competitive distance runner
Okay.
in his own right. So he served as my guide, and he would kind of run shoulder to shoulder and give me information like, there's in 20 strides there's going to be a downward slope.
Ah.
It looks like it's about 10 degrees, or in 100 yards we're going to be taking a pretty sharp right turn.
Hmm.
So that was very different, at least
Yes, it
in the
definitely
school
sounds.
districts I was in, and I competed in cross country for a couple of years, and I never saw another blind cross country high school runner. I did learn
Wow.
how to downhill snow ski when I was in junior high. Went to Mark Twain Junior High in Silverton, Oregon, and there was a ski club, and kind of the cool kids were all in the ski club, so I joined the ski club, and my parents bought
Yeah.
me a used pair of snow skis and put me on the bus, and I went to Mount Hood and Mount Hood Meadows and learned how to snow ski. And one of
Wow.
the teachers kind of happily agreed, was eager to work with me and teach me the basics and be my guide skiing. So I learned how to downhill ski. I there was an article about me in our local little paper about me running cross country, and a gentleman contacted the school and wanted to talk to me, and he was involved in Ski for Light, which is a program that came out of Norway
Okay.
for cross country skiing specifically for blind people. So I got involved in that. Um,
Mm.
Went to the international competition way back when and got a silver medal. Cross country skiing, I was crushed by a young man from Norway who beat me easily.
So as you were doing all these really amazing things, which are obviously non-stereotypical, were there any times, or maybe even later in life, at any given point as you're going through life and achieving all these things, did you feel any pressure or expectations or judgment from within the blind and low vision community? And if yes, how did you kind of navigate that pressures around, how you should be, navigating your own impairment? Have you
Hmm.
ever experienced those kind of pressures? And if yes, how did you deal with that?
I think primarily some philosophies around there are only certain ways that are appropriate to conduct certain activities or be in certain situations. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a pretty free spirit, so I'm not a big joiner. I'm not a big structure bureaucracy person. So I guess that would be the only kind of friction points I can remember. I have really strong blindness skills, braille and cane travel. I'm not a great technology person. I've used JAWS since it first came out, so I've been using JAWS for 30 years, and I
Mm.
probably use 10% of what it can do. So
Okay.
I have had some blind input that my technology skills should be better,
Okay.
which is probably true. But not no not a lot. I mean, I was fortunate at the Lighthouse for the Blind here in Seattle. We had about 250 blind and deafblind employees.
Mm-hmm.
We had 40 plus deafblind employees, people with Usher syndrome, and a lot of people using tactile sign language. And
Okay.
I was told, very clearly that there was an expectation that I needed to learn at least some sign language. So
Yeah.
I did take sign language classes, and I was taught tactile sign language by a totally deafblind person. That was super challenging.
Mm.
Um,
That's
I haven't retained much of it. I do have a name sign, KA.
okay.
Um, that your name sign is given to you by the community. You don't get to pick it.
Okay.
So
Oh,
letter K, letter A. Um,
know that. That's really cool.
so that was one time when I kind of did something I wasn't crazy about doing because there was an expectation. But
Hmm.
but 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 not too much. It was so incredible to see the transformation that happened when people became employed. Now, some this was working at an agency that employed primarily people who are blind under the Ability One program. So,
Yeah.
75% of the direct labor had to be done by people who are blind. And there were some people who, it was kind of like me, I took that sales job because it's what I could get. There are
Mm-hmm.
some people I think who feel, I can't find anything else and I need a paycheck, so I'm going to go work at the Lighthouse. There are
Yeah.
people like I remember one gentleman with a master's degree in communication who tried and tried and tried to enter that industry, marketing,
Yeah.
and just could not get an opportunity. So I was working there and wasn't terribly happy about it. And a lot of people who'd really, frankly, just had some really challenging life situations and traumatic situations and different medical conditions and the that I
Yeah.
my focus has been employment. I just with only
Right.
35% of us in the workforce, that means a lot of us are in poverty, and a
Yeah.
lot of bad things happen when you're in poverty as far as inequitable life outcomes. So I've really focused kind of my professional and academic careers on employment. My dissertation is called Journeys Through Rough Country, and it's an
Mm.
ethnographic study of blind adults employed in large American corporations.
Mm.
Because I believe large American corporations are the place where we can get most people employed the fastest.
Yeah.
I've since then become more and more interested in what you're doing as far as entrepreneurship. And I've
Yeah.
actually found a group of scholars who study disability and entrepreneurship that I'm
Mm.
engaged with.
Okay.
But yeah, I interviewed a lot of blind people working at big brand name companies that we all know,
Mm.
and finding out what led to their successes. I asked for people who would self-identify as successfully employed. And
Okay.
when I asked them, what's your criteria of successfully employed, they all said compensation, salary, making a living, having enough money to have some discretionary income to do the things I want to do.
Yeah.
And then when they talked about success factors, it was, you have to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to do the job, and then you have to have the blindness skills,
Mm.
orientation, mobility, use of technology. A lot of
Yeah.
them talked about working in some teams as younger people, like being in a choir or on a sports team.
Okay.
Um, they almost all talked about some transformational experience that gave them that strong sense of agency that they could really create their own destiny. And a lot of times it was something outdoors like skiing or rock climbing or horseback riding or something like that.
Mm.
And then they all expressed a lot of disappointment that they were disappointed it was all still so hard to get accommodations, that
No.
their employer would change a system without considering their accessibility, and they come in one day and they couldn't do their job because some systems had
Yeah.
changed. Disappointment they were the only people who'd reached that level on the org chart.
Yeah.
Disappointment that were people hired after them, less skilled than them, that were promoted beyond them. So it was
Mm.
super interesting. I finished it about 6 years ago,
Mm.
before the pandemic. But point being, I just think employment and being able to earn a living by doing something interesting, productive, that improves the world,
Yeah.
that can cure a lot of problems for people.
Definitely. Can you share a bit more about innovative impact your organization?
Yeah,
Like exactly how does one engage with it, and
yeah,
what is the journey like?
yeah. So I have two websites. One is Innovative Impact dot consulting,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really for the consulting practice. But I do some other things. I do public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I do advocacy. I'm privileged to be involved with Sensible, with your startup. I'm also an advisor to a handful of others. Um, drkirkadams.com is my overall site. drkirkadams.com. You
Okay.
can you can reach me through there or LinkedIn. So I am, after leading the American Foundation for the Blind and the Lighthouse for the Blind, I am in a situation where I am a sole proprietor. It's
Yeah.
just me, and I've had a long enough career and lifetime where I'm at the point where I can just pick and choose what I want to do.
Nice.
Um, yeah, it is nice. Um, so I guess the common theme is employment, independence, inclusion. Inclusion of
Yeah.
people who are blind and have disabilities in all aspects of life, and that's education, leisure, family life, work. Just
Yeah.
to help create situations where people can thrive according to what thriving means for them. That takes all different flavors. But
Yeah.
one of the main things I'm doing is called the Apex program. It's the apexprogram.com, and it's a virtual training and certification program to prepare blind people for careers in cybersecurity. And
Mm.
I've partnered
Okay.
with a cyber company called NovaCoast, and we've developed this, and we've got it set up with vocational rehabilitation agencies in 24 states so far. So
Mm.
Voc Rehab can pay for the training and the certification, and we've got connections with employers, and Novacoast has a staffing division,
Yeah.
who can match people up with employment opportunities. So that's an exciting one. And for anyone
Yeah.
who wants to look into it, it's just www.theapexprogram.com.
Awesome. That'll be great. So, when you worked with the big organizations like Lighthouse and American
Uh-huh.
Foundation for the Blind, as opposed to now when you're working
Mm-hmm.
primarily for yourself and with
Yeah.
programs and projects as a consultant, so what are the major differences in
Mm-hmm.
terms of impact, or maybe
Yeah.
just running, day-to-day work
Yeah.
life? How has it
Well,
how
yeah,
it
that's
for you?
a great question. Well, first of all, I received a paycheck every 2 weeks for 40 years, and now I don't. So,
That's a major change for sure.
so, so I need, I still have bills to pay. So that's an interesting dynamic.
Hmm.
I just got off the phone earlier with someone who asked me to come and speak to their disability employee resource group, and she said, how much will you charge?" And I said, "Stacy, let's talk about that. What's your budget?" Um, so my overall impact I don't know. It may be less than when I was leading AFB and Lighthouse, but it will be more directly coming from me. So I was the leader, the CEO. So my job was to guide the conversations around strategy and a shared vision and help people maintain that shared vision and make sure that everyone who reported to me had the training tools, technology supports they needed to be successful,
Yeah,
to build a high performing board and make sure every strategy started with a efficient, impactful board committee or task force, and then led down through one of the senior leaders and tied down, through the layers of the organization.
yeah.
So the actual time I spent on doing fun, high impact, innovative projects was pretty small. So when I looked at my calendar in January of 2022, when I was managing AFB from Seattle, getting up for the first Zoom meetings that started at 5:30 a.m.
Wow.
And I looked at my calendar. It was all really important stuff I was doing. It was
Yeah,
coaching my senior leadership team, holding different meetings, bringing. I spent half my time telling people they needed to talk to each other and
yeah.
facilitate those conversations. And there were HR issues, and then board subcommittees and board meetings, and all important things that were essential to having the organization function well. So
Right.
I'm really pleased with what I did with both the Lighthouse and AFB in that regard.
Yeah,
But it's just a whole different dynamic, and this as an entrepreneur,
yeah.
you get to choose. You get to figure it
Yep.
out. You get to weigh the options and take a course of action. And yeah, I love nonprofit boards. Thank you for volunteering to be on boards, but it's very cumbersome and hard to be nimble. When
Yeah.
you have anything major to do, you have to run it through the proper subcommittee and get an approval, and then they recommend it to the full board, and then the board only meets once a quarter, and it's
Oh,
it's really hard to do anything quickly.
yeah.
But now, this lady called me today, said, "Can you come and speak to the group?" And I said, "Sure." I didn't have to didn't have to get anyone to approve it. Didn't have to run it past anyone. So that's a really
That's
fun,
refreshing,
refreshing
I'm sure.
change. Yeah.
Amazing. So, in a high level perspective, at a high level perspective, what do you think these organizations, in terms of the kind of impact they are creating, are doing some things that they are doing really well, and maybe some spaces where there's room for improvement?
Yeah, the room for improvement is something that I do a lot, and that's bring the different groups together.
Hmm.
Because there's a book called Forces for Good that I
Right.
read that really stuck with me, and it says that, and it gives 12 case studies, and it says anything really transformational needs to align the government, the corporate, the nonprofit, and the community.
Mm.
And the first case study they did was Habitat for Humanity, where started out with some people building some houses, and now it's a global force for housing equity,
Yeah.
and it involves government, corporations, nonprofits, and the community. So the nonprofit community-based organizations do their thing. They have an alliance, the Vision Serve Alliance, National Industries for the Blind. There's quite a few nonprofits. They I use these conferences as examples. You go to their conference and it's all the blindness nonprofits talking together. Then
Yeah.
in the government, the Department of Education funds vocational rehabilitation agencies in every state. and the National Council of State Agencies for the Blind. I've gone to that meeting many times. It was actually in Seattle last August. So I go
Mm-hmm.
to that meeting, and it's all the voc rehab agencies meeting and talking to each other.
Mm.
And then there's an organization called Disability In, which is corporations who've committed to disability inclusion. I go to their conference. It's all these companies talking to each other.
Yeah.
And then you go to National Federation of the Blind, American Council of the Blind. It's all, the community chapters
Yeah.
talking to each other. So there's not a place where in any significant way the government, corporate, nonprofit, and community come together to work on collective solutions. So I do that in kind of a micro way.
What an
Yeah,
insight.
I
Amazing.
work with companies to help them accelerate inclusion of people with disabilities.
Right.
And basically what I do is I do ethnographic research. I interview them,
Mm-hmm.
semi-structured interviews like I did in my dissertation, and then I come back with a set of recommendations of how they can accelerate hiring more people with disabilities. And the recommendations are always some variety of the theme. We need to get the right people from Voc Rehab in here. We need to
Yeah.
connect you with some companies who are already doing this, where you can learn some best practices. We need to connect with the nonprofits in your community
Mm.
that work on employment, and then we need to connect you with the consumer and advocacy disability groups. And
Yeah.
that's really the very, it's not rocket science. It's a very simple formula. And
And yet so powerful.
yeah, and we compiled research at AFB, and there was a study that showed that of the companies that have formally said they want to hire more people with disabilities, less than 10% are working with the vocational rehabilitation system. And
Wow.
Voc Rehab has a $4 billion annual budget. They have
Mm.
offices in every state. They have hundreds of staff. They have vast resources. They can provide disabled people who are becoming employed with all the assistive technology they need. They can pay for salaries during on-the-job training. They can go into a workplace and do an assessment and help with accommodations. They can provide training to the employers, but
Yeah.
they're underutilized. And then um, it's interesting that there was another study that asked vocational rehabilitation counselors and employers the same question: what's the biggest barrier to having more people with disabilities employed?
Yeah.
And the vocational rehabilitation counselors all said employer attitudes, and the employers
Mm.
all said the lack of understanding of our operational needs. So
Mm.
there's just these big disconnects.
That's a powerful insight. I think anybody hearing that has something really important to learn. Moving towards the close of the conversation, being an individual who's been through that journey and also someone who's impacted thousands of people directly and indirectly in this journey through blindness and low vision. So what do you think? This would be a suggestion for maybe parents of children with blindness or
Uh-huh.
low vision, and maybe even adults who are losing vision slowly. How
Uh-huh.
do we maintain our professional and financial health as we go through this transition, or as we are growing up to reach that age where we require that? Because we all know that that's a major part of a healthy overall life, right? So what
Hmm.
are some suggestions or insights or just any inspiring stories that you can give to people who are trying to manage their financial and professional health
Hmm.
being a blind person?
Yeah. Well, if it has to do with employment, vocational
Mhm.
rehabilitation, people need to take full advantage and get every ounce they're entitled to. You're
Yeah.
entitled to services at age 14. You can create your individual plan for employment. Um,
Okay.
if your goal is to become a PhD in bioengineering, they can pay for that.
Mm.
They can pay your tuition. They can cover all your costs if that is an approved individual plan for employment.
Nice.
Employers need to take advantage of it, but people with disabilities do. Or oftentimes people are frustrated by VR. They've been disappointed. They've had bad experiences, but the fact of the matter is that they have the resources, and that's
Yeah.
Congress has said that's what they're supposed to do. So sometimes you
Yeah.
have to be a squeaky wheel. You might have to go sit across the desk from the director of the agency, but you need to get what
Yeah.
you want. Um, The other equivalent is the IEP, the individual education plan for students, and that IEP needs to have everything in it that that kid needs. And oftentimes the parent, like my parents, they never met a blind person before. They didn't know what was available. They really didn't know what I needed.
Yeah.
So call in some experts. If you're blind, if you have a blind kid, contact the National Federation of the Blind, American Council of the Blind, School for
Mm.
the Blind in your state, and get some experts in that meeting with you. I can
Yeah.
remember one parent saying, I was in a meeting saying, if they're going to have 6 people at the IEP, I'm going to have 7. If they're going to have 10, I'm going to have 11. And if we have to have it in the gym, that's what we're going to do.
That's resilience right there.
Yeah.
Amazing.
There is an account called the ABLE account, which
Yeah.
allows people with disabilities to do some pre-tax savings, which is great.
Hmm.
Um, education, certification, really important to compete
Yeah.
in the marketplace, and just understand it's expensive to
Yeah.
have an impairment, to be disabled. You got to pay for stuff that people without impairments don't have to
Absolutely.
pay for.
Yeah.
It's a reality. So I think budgeting is really important. Having a support network, not necessarily to provide you with money, but to
Yeah.
provide you with emotional support is important. So build your team, build your network, find other people, especially people with your same visual condition
Uh-huh.
that are maybe a little older, have gone through it, maybe have learned a few things along the way. It's so
Hmm.
easy to engage now with social media.
Yeah.
There are groups, interest groups around anything that you can think of that you are interested in.
Yeah.
So I would say join something, become engaged, become a member. If you're looking to build your resume, volunteer. Research
Mhm.
shows that volunteer work is just as strong a predictor of successful employment as paid work.
Oh, wow.
So join an organization that's focusing on something that personally interests you,
Mm.
and volunteer to be on a committee and lead a committee and get on the
Awesome.
board.
Awesome. In terms of the kind of jobs that blind and low vision people are
Yeah.
doing or can do, do you think there's some kind of distinction, or should we keep something in mind when we're going out and looking for a job? Uh, how would you suggest a young person who just,
Yeah.
wants a job to navigate that space?
Um, Everyone's going to create their own path. I would say the primary dynamic is what are you interested in?
Mm.
What um what would give you some excitement to be involved in? And,
Yeah.
oftentimes if you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you don't really know yet because you don't know what's out there. But at the moment, what's interesting you at the moment? I will say that the most success I've seen is in working for fairly large companies,
Mm.
because they
Okay.
have a lot of different job openings. They have infrastructure, they have HR departments, they understand accommodations, they understand the laws. So
Mm.
what I tell people is what I suggest to young people is do a couple things.
Yeah.
Um, think about what interests you.
Hmm.
Go to the Disability In website, disabilityin.org.
Hmm.
Look at the list of corporate partners. There's about 500 of them, companies that have all made commitments to hiring more people with disabilities.
Mm.
So they have a formal commitment to that. Scan down the list, and if a company jumps out at you that you think, hey, it'd be cool to work there, make a
No.
note of it. Go to their website. Make sure that they have the inclusion of people with disabilities formally written somewhere. See
Yeah.
if they have a disability employee resource group, ERG. That's
Mhm.
always a really good sign.
Okay.
And then do some sleuthing around, talk to people, get on LinkedIn, and find out if there's some people with disabilities who work there, and contact them and say, hey, I think it would be really cool to work at Qualcomm, or I think it'd be really cool to work for JP Morgan Chase, or I think it'd be really cool to work for Boston Scientific or Microsoft or whoever. And could I have half an hour of your time just so you
Mhm.
can tell me about it. And 99.9% of those people are going to be so excited that they were contacted and so thrilled that they can help another person with a disability along the journey that they're going to say yes. And you'll learn a lot from that conversation.
That's amazing. Thank you, Dr. Cook. That was brilliant. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts, experiences, views. It's always a pleasure having any
Yeah,
sort
time
of
flew by.
conversation
Wow.
with you. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you again.
Yep. Thank you.
Maybe we'll do this again.
Let's do it. Okay, Sakshi.
Thank you
Ha-
so much.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too.